Hi, everyone. Welcome and thanks for joining us. I'm Kevin Kelsick, partner and instructor at Luna, and also a founding partner at Mach 2, where we empower brands through story. We're very excited about this conversation. It's one that we continue to have at Luna because we believe that purpose driven organizations are among the most powerful business models for the coming decade, and they have an opportunity to fill human gaps left by many of the models that we see failing right now. So, this is a dialogue that we're committed to continuing to have, and it's why we're all here today. So, let me go ahead and introduce everyone here in the team. There's Glenn Koffold, who is, many of you may know, he is a founding partner at Luna as well as an instructor and has been a nonprofit thought leader for over 30 years. Then we have Andrea Mills, who is also a partner and an instructor at Luna, and she is a national expert on finance and accounting. Renetta Walker is an instructor at Luna and a recognized governance gladiator. And then there's Mauricio Giammattei, who is a partner at Mach 2 as well as a partner and instructor at Luna. And both he and I have worked together to help both for-profit and nonprofit brands tell better stories to reach their goals. So let's get going. So why a mindset revolution? At Luna, we really believe that organizations should not be defined by what they're not, but by the purpose and the value they create. And I think to begin the conversation, we have to just touch on the scarcity mindset that can affect too many really great organizations. This panel sees it all the time in our work. It's understandable because the nonprofit model itself was designed around the need. Grant writing, donor appeals, impact reports all require organizations to put the need first, which can unfortunately reinforce scarcity thinking. And this eventually leads to transactional relationships and unpredictable revenue. The most damaging effect of this mindset that we see in our work is often cultural. When an organization believes it should operate on as little as possible, unfortunately, it can stop seeing what it can become. And let's face it, the lack of resources is real. It's a real challenge for many small organizations. But the scarcity mindset is not necessarily all about resources. It's about a belief in what is and what is not possible. The term nonprofit is a government designation. It describes how an organization is structured, obviously, how it's governed, how it's regulated. But it's not a mission, it's not a fundraising strategy, and it's not a communications approach. We're all here today because we see that every nonprofit that we know and work with is a purpose driven enterprise. And purpose is the lifeblood of their existence. And without much more ado, we believe that purpose driven organizations will lead the coming decade, as we said. So let me start by diving into Glenn's question for Glenn. Excuse me. So, as we move on to this conversation, which we hope really sparks some very useful tips for the organizations listening here, I want to start by giving our panelists a one sentence to set their lens for this conversation, because where you sit shapes what you see. So I'm going to start with Glenn. Glenn, let's start with you. So with in one sentence, if you can, what's what's the most common fundraising belief you encounter, and that you've always wished you could change?
Yeah. I wish that people would stop the belief that fundraising is about asking others for money, when in truth, it's inviting people into purpose, belonging, and impact. And more importantly, giving them the opportunity to put their values into action.
Thank you. That's well put. Andrea, again, as quickly as you can, what's the one financial belief in the nonprofit sector that you think is quietly costing organizations the most?
Yep. Thanks, Kevin. I wanted to actually segue off of what you were talking about in the opening remarks to have organizations think about the need to fund infrastructure. There's nothing wrong with that. And if you look at any for-profit organization, they fund infrastructure. And so in a lot of cases, sometimes we have to scale back a little bit and really concentrate on the house and how that house is supporting our missions and our program people.
So true. And even in our work, so many times that infrastructure investment makes a difference between telling a really good story or continuing to tell stories that aren't doing your mission justice. Vanessa, what's the most unutilized asset in most nonprofits that no one's really talking about?
Well, as the governance gladiator, I'm sure it will come as no surprise when I say that the board is the untapped resource in nonprofit organizations. And to be clear, the untapped assets are the board's collective influence, judgment, relationships sitting around the table that the organization often fails to fully activate. So I'm going to say the board.
Yep, definitely. Mauricio, from a storytelling and branding standpoint, in one sentence, what's the most powerful and quite often overlooked asset in a nonprofit?
I think the most overlooked aspect of a brand is its storytelling. I don't think it's organized or structured in a way that it can lead the organization. It sometimes bifurcates the organization.
That's very true. Okay, so in moving forward, I wanted to explore something that often doesn't really get named. The gap between the value an organization creates and the value it believes it's deserved to claim. It shows up in different places depending on where you sit. And I think us shining a light in it right now is going to shift something. So I'll start with Glenn one more time. Glenn, you've seen the full spectrum. Organizations that walk into a room and command it. And then there's others that walk in apologizing before they even open the door. What is it in the ones that command that space? What do they understand about a relationship between their mission and their ask that completely changes not how they raise money, but also how much and from whom? Glenn, you're muted. Sorry.
Sorry about that. No, it's a great question. I think that the organizations that command the room understand that mission and fundraising are the same thing. Mission is not separate from the organization's revenue strategy. And in fact, it's one of the core pillars in a culture of philanthropy that fundraising is part of the mission. And frankly, it's how the mission gets built. Where the scarcity mindset shows up is when we approach fundraising as an apology. And I like that you use that word. Visionary leaders walk into donor conversations, or non-visionary leaders walk into donor conversations apologizing for needing money as though financial need is a weakness. But the strongest organizations, understand that money is one of the tools that allows their purpose to move forward in the world. They're not asking people to cover some sort of funding gap. They're inviting people to create something that matters. And I think that perspective changes everything. The confidence of the conversation, the kind of people we're attracting to our organization, and even the size of the ask. When we believe in our organizational value, when we're clear that our work deserves investment, I think the donor is going to see themselves more as an investor in possibility and not some rescuer of scarcity, of funding, filling some deficit.
Which as you've said many times, can really lead to a one-off donation at best. Donors want to really feel like they're investing in a successful, well-run, very efficient organization.
Yeah, it moves us from transactional to transformational.
Precisely. Andrea, obviously, in speaking about revenue and finances, it's an area that many nonprofits may be challenged at times, obviously. And there's a version of financial management that keeps an organization alive. And then there's a version that actually sets it free. In your experience, what's the difference between the two? And what does it take for a nonprofit leader to actually make that leap?
This is a great question. So if you think about it, we can on a monthly basis reconcile our books and be looking at financial information. That is where you're doing the financial line, we'll put it. But a real leader will take a look at things and say, and I'm going to use a term that for some reason people go, oh, reserves. A real leader will take a step back and go, how do we build reserves? And how do we make ourselves long-term financially viable? So making sure the books are closed every month, very important, but you need to now think past that so that you are able to build that financial flexibility, that muscle, so that you can weather a storm, or you can go down new avenues. And it goes back to Glenn's conversation too, and not be afraid to state your case. And real leaders will be able to walk into the room and say, this is why it's important for us to have this reserve base set aside for what we need to do futuristically or internally to help the organization.
Absolutely. And that those reserves can go really far when there are unpredictable changes and unpredictable things happening, which I'm sure many nonprofits are dealing with right now. So it's really relevant. Vanetta, as we know, more times than not, boards are built to govern. But organizations that are truly leading right now seem to have boards that are doing something a little different. What is it that these boards understand about their role that transforms the entire organization's capacity to grow and lead?
What they're doing differently, I talk to a lot of boards about practices of high performing boards, and they all want to know what's the secret. And I am very consistent in saying high performing boards are strategic in everything they do. They think it through. And I challenge boards to just take a step back and have a conversation around what is the highest and best use of our board. And a room, whether it's 4 people, 5 people, or 25 people, they're going to have different answers. So they need to understand how they need to show up for the organization to really excel. And that is thinking through what's needed from us. And one thing that they often don't put on the table, intellectual capital. How are they partnering with the executive? How are they helping to actually plan for the future, not just where we are today, but what we can be and what we want to become? Anticipating what's coming and multiplying the executive's ability to create impact, that's what makes a difference.
Absolutely. And in our line of work as well, in working with organizations, so often the board being an untapped resource comes to light very quickly, because sometimes we're amazed by how many times the board doesn't really know the story. It doesn't communicate the story, or it doesn't personalize and own the story, which is such a critical part of really empowering that organization. And in speaking about storytelling, Mauricio, obviously in the work we do, we know so much inevitably comes down to the conscious or unconscious, quite often, story being told. In your opinion, how much of a story that a nonprofit tells the world is actually a reflection of the story it's telling internally? And what happens to both when that internal story is rooted in limitation rather than possibility? You're muted. Well,
The internal story usually reflects itself in the external product in most cases. Um, if you have a culture that is cautious and tenuous, you're going to have a cautious and tenuous team who will write emails in a cautious and tenuous way. They'll basically follow the leader in many ways. When a team doesn't believe the organization deserves to be up and taking up some space, they don't take up that space. When you don't empower people to have their own agency within the organization with an agreed upon language, then you have a, a diffused message and a confused message. So everything that we see in the external comes from the internal, and everything can be fixed, and it doesn't take um, doesn't take a lot other than commitment to making change.
right. And that shift that you're talking about isn't always what people expect. It isn't necessarily a creative one. It isn't necessarily about coming up with the perfect fundraising campaign. It's usually a cultural one. And when the internal story shifts, everything outward shifts. Every email, every pitch, every campaign becomes way more authentic and centered. Okay, so thank you all. That was some really good insight. Every organization listening to this conversation is already generating profit, which may have raised a few eyebrows, but just because profit doesn't show up on a balance sheet doesn't mean that it's not profit. Because every life changed, every relationship built, every mission advanced is a return on investment, not only for your donors, but for your time and for your team. And I want to talk about what becomes available when organizations not only start seeing that profit, but they start leading from it. I'm going to start with Andrea. Andrea, when a nonprofit starts treating its finances as a strategic tool rather than a compliance exercise, what does that make possible?
Another great question, Kevin. So when we start looking at finances with a strategic lens, very important, and think about long-term viability, it does empower the organization along, with the conversations that Glenn was mentioning when we're approaching funders and we want to talk and tell our story. It also empowers the internal team too. And I would always say to our organizations that we work with to make financial information very transparent in the organization. And when I say that, the good and the bad, because with the bad, people can come to the rescue and help to solve the problem wherever things are going all down the wrong track. And with the good information internally, it empowers the team to feel, wow, I really work at a great organization here. We're strong, we know what we're doing, and this is how we're impacting the world around us. And so when we look at finances with a more transparent, strategic view, long-term vision, and it's very well communicated throughout the organization, it empowers everybody in the organization to be able to support it better.
Right, right, and that's very true of almost every aspect as well too. An empowered team who understands your story, understands your finances, understands your board, even they make a much better fundraising team and a much better donor engagement team, and eventually a more successful organization for sure. Um, Vernetta, most nonprofit leaders will tell you that recruiting a board is probably one of their most difficult things and their biggest challenges, often leading to them settling for who's available rather than who's ideal or who they need. What does this shift in thinking look like, that starts to attract the right people and transforms the board to be able to do what it needs to do?
It goes back to what I said in the very beginning about high performing boards being very strategic about everything that they do. Instead of just saying, okay, who do you know? How can we fill this seat? They're thinking about our mission is really important. So we need to shift our thinking in a way that changes the conversation. It's not just about putting butts in seats. I'm sorry, that's a saying I had from an old organization. They're thinking about every board seat should solve a strategic challenge. And these are the boards that develop a board matrix so that they are taking stock of who's already on the board, skill sets, talents, access, what they're bringing, and they can see where they have gaps. And with that, they can be more compelling in their storytelling around how they envision an individual contributing to the leadership of the organization, which is much better than just showing up, reviewing minutes, voting some things up or down, and then parting ways. This is about moving a mission forward. And when they find those individuals who really are filling the gaps and have a connection to the mission, it's easier. It's much easier than just sitting around the table thinking, who do you know? Who do you know? And collecting that data and getting frustrated.
So true. And in getting the board on board, the way you just spoke about it, it's really important to approach it much like you would approach a donor. The board members are different, and each one is different. And the way they own your mission and the way they take your story and repeat it often means that you have to customize the way you present it to them and really make it easy for them to own it and have them see themselves in your mission so that they can really own it. And that's critical. Glenn, what shifts when an organization starts approaching fundraising, relationships, and even their mission as a purpose-driven enterprise? What is that? What does that conversation look like, and what does it make possible for them?
Well, I think this goes back to what I was saying before. When we start viewing fundraising as part of our purpose, part of our mission, the conversation becomes much bigger than please support our programs. If we frame it around the change that we are as an organization here to make, why it matters right now, um, showing people, what we know how to do, and helping them to envision the role they can play in making it real. And that's a very different conversation, one that is confident and strategic. And frankly, I think it's more respectful of the donor because it assumes the donor wants meaning in their philanthropy, not just a transaction. And I think it also allows us to stop fundraising from need, that scarcity mindset that you talked about, and start fundraising from vision. When you fundraise around need, you might get sympathy and you might get gifts to help you close a budget gap or help you get to, your year end. But vision, I think, gets investment to help you build capacity. It helps attract larger gifts and develop longer term relationships, with your donors, and it brings people into a movement. And Fernetta, I'm just reacting to what you just said too, because it's the same conversation with donors that I think we have with board members. It's like these are all people, and gifts are not just financial, but it's the energy that people bring to this. So I think that when fundraising stops being a department, those people down at the end of the hall that plan parties, and starts becoming part of our organization's leadership posture, it becomes a way of saying our work matters, our future matters, the people we are serving matters, and that we're building something, we're building a movement that's worthy of investment in whatever that investment looks like.
Absolutely. You would you agree with the comparison that in many ways that movement is not unlike a for-profit brand promoting a product, in that it's about getting people to perceive you authentically the way you are, but also it's about getting them to believe in your story and to believe in their role in your story. And it's something that for-profit brands quite often they do very well, but they are missing one of the most important tools and one of the most important equity so many nonprofits are overflowing with, and that's authentic meaning, and also authentic relevance. So it's all really tied into that as well, too.
Yeah, when I think of the meaning of brand, I view brand, not as a logo or a name, but I view it as a promise.
Yeah, absolutely.
When I buy your product, I'm not just buying a product, I'm buying into something. And I think the best brands are, you know, are the ones that develop loyalty, and not just loyalty in purchasing habits, but loyalty in, I want to be part of this. This is important to me. I want to be part of that. And I think that's what we have to accomplish in our nonprofits. Is we want people to say, I need to be here. And I think this is also very important, and without getting too wonky in this, but we've seen a shift in donor behaviors. The baby boomers, you know, this is a generalization, support a lot of the things that their parents supported. But we saw a shift with the Gen Xers and the younger generations, that they want to solve problems with their philanthropy. And I'm defining philanthropy much broadly than just money. They want to solve problems, and they're organization agnostic. They are going to become part of an organization, part of a movement, with a group that they believe really can make the change that they as individuals want to see happen, whether it's in literacy or environmental causes or arts and culture, whatever it is. That's who they're going to gravitate to. And so that's why I think brand is so important in this.
And it's a word that many nonprofits shy away from, unfortunately. And part of this conversation is really to have people see themselves in a different light, because there are lots of assets to be used to promote your mission in that world. Mauricio, we work with organizations whose stories are genuinely extraordinary. The transformation of communities, the lives changed in ways that many brands, quote unquote brands, would pay a lot of money, or they do spend a lot of money to fabricate these stories. But what do you think is the reason? What is it that needs to? What is the shift in thinking? What does that look like? I'm sorry. Excuse me. Okay, sorry. What is it that stops the organizations we see from owning their story, as powerfully as their mission deserves, really? And what opens up when they do?
I think it comes down to permission and agency, which often starts with leadership. You can tell a bold story to the world, but you can't tell it until you've told it to yourself first. And I think that's a syndrome that happens in a lot of the organizations. They don't keep track of stories and successes that happen along the way in order to tell the longer story. The permission to own profit in what you do, meaning everything that you do should turn some level of profit so you're able to do it again next year, and perhaps pay better salaries and perhaps make better investments. Um, there's also a need to invest in infrastructure, which again comes from the internal, and when there's no infrastructure, it manifests itself in the external. um, the permission to lead. When you were asking the question about what what's the difference between an agent, a not-for-profit who walks into the room and commands the room versus one that doesn't, it really comes down to the permission of owning that leadership, that success and profit. And I'm talking about profit not in dollars. I'm talking about profit as in enriching yourself with knowledge and opportunities to continue to grow your organizations, perhaps not not vertical but horizontal, and looking at ways that will produce more revenue rather than existing formats that you use. Um, and really, what's most important is kind of dovetailing to Glenn is your culture. Your culture has to be your number one cheerleader. They have to bring not only their organization along with them, but to build a movement that helps people jump onto your organization. People want to be part of a solution right now. They don't want to be part of writing a check. They want to see that change, and they want to see it fast. So when Glenn was saying behaviors are changing, I agree full heartedly with that, because that change that I'm seeing is people actually digging into their physical pockets and writing checks or sending money. Whereas before, people were very much in this mindset that not for profits were funded by the government. So that fundamental change needs to happen as quickly as possible, because your grants should be a percentage of your income, but your other elements of income should be treated like a normal business. Um,
Yeah,
that's-
those are very important points, and that I know in our work we see it's amazing how many really great organizations doing incredible work don't own that value. They don't say it, they don't even acknowledge it, and sometimes they're not even conscious of it because it's easy because obviously they're overwhelmed by what they have to do, but their role in a larger society as an organization, as a business, is to maximize their returns. And what better returns than the outcomes that they create? And it's so important to capture those outcomes and tell those outcomes and make them relatable to not only donors but everyone in general. Another area that you touched on there, Mauricio, that I feel is really important is the concept of leadership, particularly right now. So many organizations have been dealing with a chaotic revenue environment in the last couple of months, and we're seeing certain organizations break down where there are big holes left in what might have been expected from the government or expected from a different kind of company. And it's such an amazing opportunity for a nonprofit who already owns that space, but no one knows it, to step into it and to take leadership and to run things the way they should be run from a social perspective, instead of necessarily always having it being based around the external factors like revenue and money. So a real opportunity for nonprofits here, and we really see this as a great time right now for them to step into that responsibility.
Can I just quickly add that we also see revenue? One of the key markers of revenue is the impact that you create. It's not necessarily dollars in the bank. Rev-
Absolutely.
Revenue means increased number of people you serve. Revenue means new programs put into place that are actually functioning. So revenue does not equate to a dollar sign. Revenue equates to growth.
Right, right. We're going to move through a couple more questions, and then we'll be able to take a few questions at the end. So if you're listening and you'd like to jot some down, please do. I have a question for each of our panelists again. And I'm going to ask you to be really singular and bold with your answer. I want you to tell us what every leader watching today really needs to carry away from this conversation. I'm going to start with Renato. Renato, if a nonprofit leader watching today decided that as of tomorrow, that their board was going to be their single greatest and strategic asset, where does that decision take them? What does that look like?
What does it look like? I would say, first of all, they have to reimagine what governance can be. They need to have a different type of conversation. And in saying that, it's because a lot of leaders come to the table, whether it's the board side or the executive, with a certain framework in mind. And so now you have the freedom to really think about what do we really need to get where we want to go. So where does that take them? I think about the fact that organizations that do not limit themselves in terms of governance, they have a deeper understanding that good governance or governance determines how fast you adapt, how boldly you lead, and ultimately how much impact you can create. When we think about governance as really just the collective body in the room, although they govern as a group of the whole, but if we limit our use and leveraging of the board to just what happens around that table, especially if you're not having generative conversations and making sense of the environment and being forward looking, you're going to limit the organization's impact because I hate to use this term, but outside of the box thinking, I say if two heads are better than one, then where do we get with like 13 or 15, whatever size your board is? And that means thinking differently about how do we create on-ramps and opportunities to hear from everyone, leverage everyone, not just when they're in the boardroom, but forming those relationships, picking up the phone, having conversations, and developing. When I say developing, pouring into the relationships. So it's not just whether it's quarterly or even if your board is meeting monthly, your board members are thinking about the organization on a regular basis, even when they're not in the boardroom, and they get excited about what the organization can do. And I'd say that's an opportunity. It's a shift in mindset, and something that I think about for a while. I had worked with so many boards who their approach even to recruiting new board members was to downplay the role. Like, oh, you don't have to do much. It doesn't require much work. Maybe however many minutes, or I'm sorry, maybe an hour a month. But if we elevate the role, then people see the potential of it. And if they're excited and passionate about your mission, it's a different day. It's a different day every day because you're constantly thinking about how can I contribute to actually have this organization be the change I want to see.
Yes, yes, that's very true. And I'm going to just touch on something you said earlier where, about limitations. And I think an important part of that is stepping back so that you can see your limitations, because many organizations can't, and they think they're operating at top speed, but they need to step back sometimes and really look at it. And
I would add to that, a board self-assessment is an excellent way to see and to kind of unpack where the board is and how it's operating.
right. And also too, when it comes to getting them on board, so to speak, sharing real stories from real outcomes and getting them involved in the day-to-day stories as they happen, and maybe even customizing those stories based on what you think the board member themselves are interested in is really important. We see so many boards where they get a big packet every month, and that's the level of communication that they get. But it's really important that you tell your stories as well. And Glenn, I see that your hand is up.
Yeah, I want to add something to what you said, Vernetta, about the on ramps to have those conversations. I think boards should also be open to the off ramps for
Right.
some people on the board. And I'm not saying you have to push people off your board, but I've seen a lot of times people are on boards and they don't know why they're there. They're not comfortable, but they're loyal loyal to the chair or to the executive director, and they don't want to let somebody, they don't want to let that person down. So we can't be afraid of those off ramps.
Agreed. Board service was never meant to be a life sentence. I'm just saying.
It's so true.
So Andrea, tell us about what financial leadership looks like for the nonprofits that will still be thriving in 8 or 10 years from now. What are they doing differently today?
So a very exciting question. I just got back from an accounting conference last week, and you kind of asked for a one word. I'm going to say
Go
technology.
ahead. Take your time.
And so um, the accounting industry is changing very rapidly, and the accountants of the future hopefully will be um, uh, moved up to be more taking on more of that leadership responsibility of what they need to be doing within an organization. Because if you think about the monthly close and the transactional and the data and cutting checks and all of that, that's going away. And so the typical accountant is being pushed out of operations to be taking more of a futuristic view of the organization, and it is their responsibility. One, I always make a triangle. One, to have a great relationship with the development team, so the development team has a really good understanding of finance and can talk finances. Have a really great relationship with the program staff so that they know the needs and what is really truly needed out there, and that triangle needs to work together. And so with what's happening now with technology and transactional data and the timeliness of information, that is hopefully going to empower more accounting people to be able to take a step back and act more as leaders. And because they'll be out of the transactional nature, and they'll be in the real-time data that can be used to make strategic decisions and really have good programmatic impact. So I'm excited for it. And the bookkeepers of the world will say, "Oh, my job's going away," but not necessarily. It will be moving people into different levels when you're looking at what happens with financial information.
So true. So true. Mauricio, if a purpose-driven organization decided to begin investing in its story and its brand with the same conviction that it invests in its mission and its operations, what do you think is the first thing that would change? You're muted. You're muted.
I think that every relationship with every stakeholder would change. I think that everything would go from transactional to investment. People would invest in your purpose. They would invest in your movement. People don't just give to what they understand; they give to what they feel that they're part of. So there has to be a significant shift on creating a sense of value when you're talking to your potential donor. Um, Also, a story is not a communication line, a communication budget line. A story is something that's compiled over many years, and a structured way of keeping your stories and being able to craft them to different audiences is also something that would shift critically. And
Yeah.
that you know some data that's out there is that a purpose driven organization tends to grow 3 times faster than your average organization. So it gives you an idea of making the overall mind shift, not just on paper but in the mind. You stand the chance of growing way faster than just staying there as a not-for-profit doing a function.
And I would add looking at growth differently too. I think it's easy to look at growth as maybe more work, but growth is actually the maximization of your mission and allowing you to do so much more. And
It's what I was saying basically. It's not that your jobs are going away. It's just that your intellectual levels are being elevated so you can function at a higher level. You have more time to make those phone calls. You have more time to do those one-on-one cultivations.
and as you mentioned, telling your story and building your brand isn't really just a communication budget line. It is, we say this to our clients all the time, it is everything you do. Every interaction, every moment that a donor or stakeholder has with your organization is part of your story. And being conscious of that and working towards maximizing that is really a very helpful way to continue your growth. So, Glenn, if an organization watching today made one fundamental shift in how they think about the relationship between their mission and their revenue, what would that shift look like?
Well, first of all, I would say that nonprofit leaders and board leaders need to be fearless. And there's a great book called Be Fearless, written by Gene Case from the Case Foundation. It's published in 2019, and I would really encourage everyone to read it. It's a great book for not just business, but for life. And I'll answer the question with a story. So I've had the wonderful opportunity the last 6 months to start a new nonprofit myself, in addition to everything else that I'm doing. And my co-founder and I, have just finished our strategic plan. We're working on our revenue plan for the next 3 years, and we've been given some government funding to start the work that we're starting to do. And I've laid out some programmatic things that I want to see us do over the next couple of years. And she said, well, the money we got from the government isn't going to cover all that. And I said, no, it's not. I said, but we started this organization to to start a movement and to build something new and something necessary. I said, I don't want to shortchange our plans based on money. I want to go out and bring in the people who can help us, who can give us that money, who can help us access those dollars and access the other talents that we need. And Vernetta, you'll appreciate this. We formed an initial 3-person board, and my co-founder and I are 2 of the 3, but we are looking very specifically at a limited number of board members, 5 people who are going to say, I love this. I want to be part of this. I want to build this movement. We're not looking for butts and seats, as you said, and I use that phrase all the time. So I think if we view revenue, as I said before, as part of our mission, it just stops us from asking what can we afford to do, and what's the future we're responsible for building, and what kind of investment is that gonna require, and it gets us out of that scarcity mentality. My attitude is there is money out there. Philanthropy as a percentage of GDP has been stagnant for decades and decades and decades. I think that the federal government has dramatically reduced its support of nonprofits. I live here in Florida, and we are undergoing some shifts right now that are going to be devastating. And I think it was Churchill who said, never let a good crisis go to waste. We have to do the things that we're talking about in this session and other conversations we have with our Luna audience. We have to do it, and we have to be fearless. So that's a long answer to your question.
A good one, though. Well, we're running close to time, and I just wanted to, first of all, thank everyone who's attended, but also thank all of you for your really great input. And this is an ongoing conversation because this is something we're very passionate about at Luna, and it's something you're going to see a lot more from us on. And what we've heard today across fundraising, finance, governance, and story is the same truth expressed in many different ways. The organizations that are going to thrive are not the ones that are waiting for more resources. They're the ones that decide right now that they want to stand for what they want to stand for what they create, and that it's worth investing in. that it's worth protecting and worth saying out loud, primarily. They're bold, they're consistent, and they do it without apology. At Luna, we believe that organizations that will define this next era are not waiting for the environment to change, but they're changing it themselves and showing up with the confidence, the strategy, and the story that purpose-driven leadership actually demands. And we really hope that this has been a spark of inspiration or affirmation for you. And we really look forward to continuing the conversation. Thanks again.
Kevin, I see some people in the chat who are typing.
Okay.
So we may get a couple things in there. Shedley put fearlessness. Shedley, great to see you. I just have to say we have some people from our very first cohort at Luna almost 3 years ago who are here today. So I love it when you all are here. And Shedley's asking if she's saying she wants her board to listen to the conversation, and we will make it available on the platform, Shedley, so anyone can come in and look at it. And I think we'll have this up on our new YouTube channel as well, won't we, Kevin?
Well, we will. Yeah, we will. Yep. Great. So I don't see any other questions. Sorry, Andrea, were you going to say something?
No, I was just saying thank you, everyone.
Yes. Well,
We have one person typing, so if we
Okay.
can give her a couple seconds.
Sure.
Carolyn's typing.
And I hate to say it, but there's a lot more conversations coming this way about this particular subject. So anything you can add to the conversation will always be helpful in developing the topic further.
Okay, I'll just read Carolyn's comment. She says, it's been a while since I've attended a Luna conversation, and I want to thank you all the panelists for their insights and how to reframe the question of how to approach storytelling and fundraising. It's fantastic food for thought and action. So I'll pass that on to all the participants. And thank you, Shedley, and everyone else for your comments. And I guess if that's it, we will wrap it up and give you 5 minutes back.
Thanks for being here, everybody.
Thank you.
It's been a pleasure.